There we go. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is one of the Twin City DSA Q&As we are hosting with candidates. This is one step in what we hope will be a very engaging and democratic process. Once all the candidate Q&As have been held, steering committee will hold a chapter-wide meeting where we'll go through the candidate seeking endorsement and have member debate. Before that, there are also opportunities for debate via the chapter Slack channel and throughout the process, but that meeting will be an opportunity for structured discussion. Following that, an open vote online ballot will be sent to members that will allow everyone to vote on the endorsement, with each race considered individually with a 60% threshold using an STV method. All right, let's get to it. My name is Timothy Hart. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm one of the co-chairs of Twin City DSA's electoral committee, and we're joined here today by Jason Chavez, who is running in Ward 9. He is running in an open race as the incumbent. Councilmember Cano is not seeking re-election. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Before I begin, I just want to thank you all for allowing me to share space with you today and for all the work that you do for all our communities. My name is Jason Chavez Cruz. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm proudly running to represent Ward 9, which is the ward that I was born and raised in. I'm an organizer, a policy worker, a renter, an LGBTQ Latino, and I'm a proud son of undocumented immigrants that work so much for so little. At a young age, my family and I experienced homelessness. I witnessed my father be deported 2 times and had to work at the age of 14 because my parents had to work up to 3 jobs each and over 80-hour work weeks just so we can live here in Ward 9. And because of this, I'm committed to fighting beyond the $15 minimum wage that isn't enough for our communities, that isn't enough for people here in Ward 9 and anybody else in the city of Minneapolis. I'm running because I've experienced most of the things that we're fighting for every single day right now. For example, we're fighting for a new system of public safety that's going to work for every single person, especially here in Ward 9. And it begins by abolishing the Minneapolis Police Department. It starts with fighting for safety beyond policing methods. And it's making sure that the Minneapolis Police Department stops working with ICE that's deporting my family members, that's deporting my people and my community, especially here in Ward 9. With that being said, like I said before, it's important that we start fighting for that new Department of Public Safety so we can keep every single person here safe. Through my day job, I have the honor and privilege of working with unions like SEIU, Teamsters, and AFSCME at the Capitol. Back in December, we helped pass unemployment insurance so we can have people actually have money once they were laid off. And right now we continue to work side by side to help people that were in high school that now are unemployed have access to unemployment insurance, and also working to make sure that people that are hourly school workers like bus drivers or paraprofessionals that don't work in the summer that can have access to unemployment insurance, because right now that isn't a reality. I also just want to mention that our ward doesn't need a politician. It doesn't need people and corporations telling us what to do. The people in our ward know the answers to our most prevalent issues, which is why our campaign is a community-led and community-centered campaign that's going to listen to the people on the ground, because they know how to solve the issues that we're facing, which is a lot going on in our ward. Again, I'm the youngest person running here in Ward 9. I come from a working class family, an undocumented family. I was born and raised in Ward 9, and I'm proudly ready to take the leadership alongside the community.
Thank you, Jason. So we'll begin the Q&A with some pre-submitted questions. I'd invite the audience to submit any questions that they have using the Q&A function, and we will get to those in the second half of the event. I have some supplemental questions in the event there is a lull to those. I would say that pointed questions are okay, but please keep questions in good faith and comradely, and if possible, keep them brief. First question that I will begin with, it was one submitted before the event, and it goes, Ward 9 is largely working class, which means that ensuring fair working conditions and practices for residents are critical. What are your ties to the labor movement, and how have you supported working class people?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Don't know who asked it, but it's really important. I do want to start off with, I do come from a working class family. Like growing up, I had to see my parents work up to 3 jobs each in 80-hour work weeks, which means that I barely had to see them at home. I had to start working at the age of 14 just so I can have supplemental money that would allow my parents to also, not only were they helping us because that's what they're doing as parents, but my brother and I had to work at a young age to make sure that they also had money so we could live in the home that we were at, which eventually wasn't even enough to keep us in our own home. Um, like I mentioned also earlier, I don't have the privilege of saying that I come from a union household, which is something I wish I did. My parents are undocumented, and unfortunately in the labor movement, undocumented people haven't always been welcomed. And I want to make sure that once we get to City Hall, that we change that to make sure that undocumented people are actually being taken care of in the labor movement. But going back to the labor movement, I work at the Capitol right now, and I work a lot and alongside unions. I mentioned it a little bit earlier in my introduction, but I work a lot with SEIU, Teamsters, AFSCME, the trade unions to make sure we're passing unemployment insurance, especially critically important for our hourly school workers like bus drivers, paraprofessionals, so they can have access to unemployment insurance, because right now they don't have access to that. And it's literally making them choose between having a home or feeding their family. I've also been working a lot with high school students in the same unions that I mentioned earlier, along with other ones, to make sure that high school students have access to unemployment insurance. Like I said, I started working at a young age so I can support my family as much as they're supporting me. But also right now, a lot of people, especially people of color that are in high school that lose their jobs, it makes their homes lose a lot of money and eventually can make them homeless. And we're working with the unions to make sure that unemployment insurance is available to them as well. And then I've also been able to work a lot with the fire unions to make sure that our buildings are up to code. Right now, we saw in Cedar Riverside, a lot of our community members die because of fires. And been working alongside the fire union to make sure that we have sprinklers in every single building to make sure that fires stop taking the lives of our community members. So that's what my tie is to labor unions. I work for the Workforce and Business Development Committee, so it's helping expand employment, expand union jobs, expand youth employment, but also making sure we have a working class agenda. And I'll be taking all this experience with me to City Hall to make sure that we're working for people like my family and people like our communities here in Ward 9 and the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you. Next question that we had was, we have seen politicians, particularly DFL members, who haven't done enough to represent and empower the undocumented community, or have only shown up when there's an incident with ICE. How will you finally give the undocumented community the representation it deserves and needs?
Yeah. So this one's really personal to me. I kind of mentioned earlier, but I do come from an undocumented family. My father and my mother crossed the border at a young age while my mom was pregnant. And while they crossed the border, they were separated in 2 different cars. And in one car, once they were at the checkpoint in the United States border, my mother was able to, because she was in another car, was able to cross the United States, and my father wasn't. He was sent back to Mexico. So for a couple months, my mom was a single mother in the East Slopes neighborhood here in Ward 9, while my father was back in Mexico. And my father was eventually able to make it back to the United States, but was then sent back the same time while my mom was still pregnant. And my mom had to raise me for a couple, I would say a year or so, alone without my father, which added a lot of implications to our family with money. And I know money isn't everything, but it sure did help. It would have helped our family make sure that we had access to things that we don't have. With that being said, though, I'm not saying I'm the only person in this race, but I am the only one that can speak Spanish, and Spanish is a big language of survival here in Ward 9, since we do have the biggest Latinx community in the state, and we have the biggest undocumented community in the state that needs someone to have access to, that they can relate to, that they can speak to, and I have that. So I guess that's one thing that helps me connect to make sure that our undocumented community is being cared for. here in Ward 9, they're in consistent fear of deportation. We've seen in the years past, maybe not as much as before, ICE come into Lake Street and pull people and families apart by taking them away from their loved ones, taking them away from their workplace, and sending them either back to Mexico, back to a different country, countries that they haven't been for in a long time, and making them not live the way that they're supposed to be living. So like I said, I think I appreciate that question a lot, because I do know the undocumented community is one of the most underrepresented communities here. And I want to make sure that we're working alongside the East African community, the Latinx community, because undocumented communities aren't just the Latinx community. They come from a whole bunch of different immigrant communities, and we all want to work together to make sure that everyone has that representation, but has the work needed to get things done. And some of the things that I want to do to make sure that we change this stuff is making sure that we do two big things. Back when the pandemic started, the city of Minneapolis showed us that we actually can do things for our undocumented community. We just choose not to on purpose. And it was one of the happiest moments of my life, because for the first time, I saw that my parents could actually have access to government resources. The city of Minneapolis allowed rental assistance programs and allowed undocumented immigrants for the first time ever to qualify for these programs. And that's something they never, ever do. And that's something when I get to City Hall, I'm going to be fighting for every single day. So people like my parents, people like my family members actually have access to these resources that they don't have right now. And then another thing I want to do is something that nobody's really talking about, is because people think immigration is just a federal issue, sometimes a state issue. But what we can do right now, literally right now, is pass a DACA fund. So our documented friends and family members don't have to pay that $495 fee that sometimes they have to choose between paying rent, eating food, or even choosing a place to stay. And we can pass that right now. And that's something I'm going to be working every single dang day at City Hall to make sure that we can pass that. So yes, that question is very personal. It means a lot. And I hope I answered that.
Definitely. Thank you. The next question we had that was submitted asks, what would you like to see done with the former site of the 3rd precinct? Do you think the police should return to the building or used for something else? Or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I don't think the police should ever return there. And I think it should just be used as a place that community can take back, take ownership, whether it's making sure we can house our community members there or expand that to something else that would benefit the community. I don't know if I'm going to have a public safety question, but I can use this moment to expand on my public safety platform. It's really important to me specifically. I do believe in abolishing the Minneapolis Police Department, and that's for a couple reasons. The first one is when I was at the young age of 17, my brother, myself, and another family member were walking back from a Lake Street gas station, which was across from my cousin's home, and the police department detained us. And they patted me down, just like, touched me, whatever. And the lady police officer grabbed her hands and did this with her hands on my private part. And I screamed, I yelled because I was in pain. And then she shoved me in the police car and then shut the police door on my leg. And at that point, I was just scared. My brother told me, I'm not going to quote the exact language he used, but he told me to shut up because he was scared for his life, while I was also being beat by the police officer, scared for my life. And before I say what happened, they basically said that we fit the description, that people reported us for doing something we didn't do, so that we're criminals. So they took us to downtown office and realized that it wasn't us. It was just a couple brown people walking down Lake Street, which is a lot of people. And we just magically fit the description and eventually just gave us curfew tickets because it wasn't us. And at that moment, it was one of the scariest moments of my life, because if y'all don't know, I hope y'all know now that the Minneapolis Police Department collaborates with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I could not call my parents. I could not call my mom. I could not call my dad. And I'm definitely not going to risk any of my family members, risk to send them back to Mexico, because that is something I'm not going to do. So it was just a scary, scary night for us, because we didn't know who to get help from, because it's just an unfortunate situation. But anyways, just want to share that story of how that has transformed or allowed me to believe in what I believe now. George Floyd was murdered across our ward, and to this day, nothing has happened. Dalal Eid was murdered in our ward, and nothing has happened. The Minneapolis Police Department cannot, and I will say it again, cannot be reformed, and it definitely can never be repaired, and it needs to be abolished, and we need to design what public safety actually means, like, which is why I'm a proud supporter for the Yes for Minneapolis campaign, because I truly believe that our community can design what public safety means and what public safety will look like in the city of Minneapolis. It means defunding the police department and bringing that money into our communities to make sure we fund youth employment, making sure that the Step Up program doesn't become just for some selected few young people that are doing good in school, but accessible to a lot of young people beginning at the young age of 14 to have access to employment that pays them well, but when they graduate high school, and even if they don't graduate high school, they have the opportunity to have a good paying job, which isn't happening in my ward right now. A lot of people are struggling and they need those opportunities. It means making sure we help fund stuff to end the opioid crisis, like making sure we have safe injection sites all over the city. It means that we just fully invest to make sure that the basic needs of people in our ward are finally met and all over the city as well. And then I'll just end that just because we want to abolish MPD does not mean we're going to have safety. We need to take that away from people that are saying that police does not equal safety. Yeah, I'll repeat that again. Police does not equal safety. We can do a lot of other violence prevention methods that will actually keep us safe, like working with SEIU to fund their CSS program to actually keep our community safe, especially making sure right now they're working with the African-American community and also the Latinx community that needs that help on Lake Street, making sure right now, one of the only people in this race that actually has the connections to the small business community, because I know a lot of people here. I was born here. I lived off those grocery stores that made sure that I had food to eat. And I have the connection to the small business community that will actually not only, people assume that just because they're small businesses, they're supporting the police. No, they just need a leader that is willing to be courageous enough to support getting rid of the system of public safety that isn't working right now. And I will be that person once I get to City Hall. And then I'll just end it. We can make sure that we move that money into mental health responders and making sure we actually change the way that dispatch system for the police department works. Because right now it isn't working and people need a way to revamp that system to make sure it works. So I hope that answers my public safety stance. If you kind of didn't ask that, but I wanted to touch into it in case nobody asked it later.
Well, that was going to be the next question. What would 3 concrete changes you'd push should the public safety charter amendment pass? And I think you covered that, and thank you for sharing that story too. So in that case, the next question, and to our audience members, like I said, we'll be shifting to audience questions in the second half. So if you have questions for Jason, I'd encourage you to get them in using the Q&A function if possible. Let's change tack a little bit. The next question is, who are some current elected officials, locally or nationally, that you would like to model your leadership off of?
I was a proud supporter of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, and I will continue to look up to what he does, although I do know that we need to go farther than what he has done and supports. Another good friend of mine is Senator Omar Fateh. It's someone I work alongside with, someone I see as a mentor, and also someone I hope to work alongside once we get to City Hall to make sure that not only are we doing what's right for our ward, but working with our partners and leaders in government in the Senate to make sure that our resources are being well equipped here for the ward. So Bernie Sanders, love the guy, and Omar Fateh, love him even more.
Next question that we have down here asks, and I imagine you've covered in a certain amount of depth your public safety vision. The question was, what are 3 major policy goals that you would seek should you be elected?
Just in general?
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah, so I talked a lot about it, but housing justice is one of my critical and most important things of when I get to City Hall, not only because my family and I experienced homelessness at a young age, but because Ward 9 is a center hub where our government isn't listening and refuses to work to support our unhoused community. So one big thing I want to push for is a big renters bill of rights. And I don't know what's going to happen with our policies this year, but if nothing happens, this is what I want to make sure happens. Rent control, the tenant opportunity to purchase, making sure we have funding for the right to counsel. And like I mentioned before, if the state doesn't do work, making sure that we work to ensure that our buildings are up to code, to have sprinklers in every building, because fires shouldn't steal any more lives, and making sure we force MPHA to do work to stop privatizing housing and make sure we expand that for all our community members, because we know AMI is not working for our community members. We know the best indicator to ensure that our communities actually have housing that works for them is making sure we do have public housing, making sure we have income-based housing, and making sure that our communities are housed. So housing, I know that's a lot of policy works, but I clump it into a renters bill of rights. Another big fight is making sure we do some labor and workers' rights, and it starts fighting beyond that $15 minimum wage, because we know that's a low bar. It's a compromise and it's not working for our communities. And we need to make sure we work and make sure that our communities actually have jobs that pay well, do well, and if they're union, even better, but jobs that actually make them live their life. And then the last part, aside from policing, because that's my number one issue, I talked about that already, but I want to give you all something else to think about, is immigration at the local level. It's really critical and important for me, my family, my friends, people here in Ward 9 that need support. So it would be making sure we have like a bill of rights for immigrants that would include like that DACA fund, but also ensuring that like if the city decides to do anything, they should be working really hard to include undocumented immigrants in that. Like that rental assistance that never includes undocumented immigrants should, moving forward, always include undocumented immigrants, and any other kind of funding should always include the undocumented community. So some of that.
Thank you. I'm going to switch now to a couple of the audience submitted questions that we've gotten so far. I'd encourage everyone to continue submitting questions as we go through these. I'll hopefully get to all of them. As we get closer to the end, I'll let you know when I'm going to cut that off. But for now, the first ones we have submitted from an audience member is, would you support a city resolution calling upon the Biden administration to end the U.S. embargo against Cuba?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Figured that would be a quick one. Next question. Are you a landlord / do you own any investment properties with tenants?
I'm a renter.
All right. Next question we have. How are you going to bring good paying union jobs into Ward 9?
Yeah. So good thing right now is that I'm already doing that. Like I said, I work for the Workforce and Business Development Committee in the House, which is in charge of the state funding to bring jobs into the state of Minnesota. I'm doing that in Ward 9, but it'll be making sure that I'm working alongside our siblings and unions, but also making sure I'm working with the chair of the Workforce and Business Development Committee, and my relationship to him is going to help us make sure that Ward 9 is a priority. Right now, we do a lot of grant funding, but also working alongside the unions to pass policies to bring jobs into wards, into cities, and different parts of the state. But I'll make sure to use my connection with Representative Malcolm Noor to make sure that Ward 9 is a priority, specifically because we're one of, along with some North Side, Ward 4 and Ward 5, are one of the city wards that need people to take action. And without that, we won't be able to do it. So it'll make making sure that we work alongside the Workforce Committee to bring jobs into Ward 9, but union jobs and good paying jobs.
Thank you. Next question, somewhat similar to the one I had asked about the elected officials locally or nationally, but specifically they ask, if you had to choose, what current council member do you think is a good model for the kind of elected official you want to be? And what is something that they practice that you would like to replicate?
I know I'm gonna, when we go to City Hall, I want to begin by saying that we're gonna be a council member that is led by the community, and it's a community-centered ward. So we're not going to be like anybody on the council right now, because what we're going to be doing is bringing the voices from the people that are mostly unheard from our ward into the city to make sure that we're actually representing the people well, making sure we put that working class agenda at the forefront, and making sure that people should not have to not live their lives. If I were to choose, I would say Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, as he has taken more stances on public safety in regards to changing the system of policing as we know it than any other council member that we have on the city council right now.
Thank you. Next question we have submitted from our audience is, how have you shown up for communities other than your own? And I believe, how will you continue to do so in City Hall?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of being entrusted of working alongside the Asian immigrant community, and I would say specifically with post-conviction relief. Right now, I got to work on legislation with them. If y'all don't know, right now, a lot of Asian immigrant community members are facing deportation, and it's because of post-conviction. Right now, there's basically, let's just say that you commit a quote unquote crime and you had bad guidance from your lawyer to take a plea deal. Years later, 10 years later, you're forced to be deported back to your country because you had bad guidance from your lawyer. So I've been working alongside on legislation with them since like 2018 through the Public Safety Committee at the Capitol to make sure that they specifically would not be deported for stuff like that and would have a chance in court to redo their case so they don't have to face that in the community. Right now, I've been working a lot. I've been getting connected to the Little Earth community. So a lot of indigenous community members that I've been working alongside to figure out how we fight against environmental racism that's facing our communities in Ward 9. And then I've been working a lot with our Black and Muslim community, specifically with CARE Minnesota, and either sometimes like late at night until 1 a.m, sometimes like really late until like 10 p.m, but specifically working on changing the system of policing that doesn't work. For example, we've been working alongside each other to pass qualified, to make sure that qualified immunity is reality, to end it for policing, right? Making sure that bad police officers can get kicked out, because right now that isn't a reality and it's a law that needs to be changed. So working alongside CARE, doing that, and making sure that when police murder, because they're gonna do it again soon, that the recording must be released 48 hours later to the families and to the community to make sure that they're not holding on to tapes and that the tapes are not redacted and giving us a false impression of what actually went down, because we know the Minneapolis Police Department continues to alter data, continues to alter videos to give information from their point of view, which we know from what happened with George Floyd. They were trying to say it was medical, isn't it? But because it was recorded from community members, we found out that they were lying to us. And then also worked with them to make sure we bring funding to the East African and also the Black ADOS community through the Fernando Castillo Act that would make sure we're funding youth employment, making sure we're funding youth intervention, and then youth opportunities all over the state of Minnesota. And yeah, so that's just some of the work I've done, but I do a lot of immigrant work as well that isn't just from the Latinx community, but also the broader community from all different backgrounds. And I think that question, whoever asked that, is really important, specifically because Ward 9 has a big Latinx, big East African, a big urban indigenous community, and a big LGBTQ community in our ward. And we have a lot of things that we need to get done. And we need to work together in order to get what we need.
Thank you. Going a bit off of that one, the next question that was submitted asks, Ward 9 has a large and strong LGBTQ plus community. How will you defend and advocate for them, both in the city council and in the broader community?
Yeah. Well, I'm queer, and that doesn't say everything, right? But I am going to be the first LGBTQ Latino ever elected to the city council, and I hold that with pride because when I get to City Hall, I'll make sure that our LGBTQ community is being heard and is being centered in everything that we do. Some of the first things that we need to do is make sure that we make housing a human right, and not just a buzzword. I'm talking about that full renters bill of rights that, if you didn't hear at the beginning, would include rent control, that tenant opportunity to purchase, expanding public housing while making sure it's not privatized, having that right to counsel funded, and other renters' rights a reality, because we know our LGBTQ plus community is one of the most impacted communities when it comes to that. So making sure that housing is a human right and making sure our LGBTQ community is taken care of, but also making sure right now, one thing the city council is not good at doing is working across other sectors of government. They're not working well with the Hennepin County government. They're not working well with the state government, and they're definitely not working well with the federal government. And to be honest, we can say that about every single sector of government. Our Hennepin County government isn't working with the city, isn't working with the state, and the same for the state, and same for the federal, which gets to my point. I will make sure that as a city council member, I'm going to fight and work alongside my senator, our other government persons in the House and in the Senate to make sure we ban that trans panic defense that's still legal in Minnesota, making sure we ban conversion therapy statewide, and making sure we do make sure that we have PrEP funded and free and other resources that our LGBTQ community needs, specifically our trans siblings that are continuously under attack by the federal government and right now in the Senate and our government at the state level. So making sure our office is fighting the fight beyond just the local level, because that's what we need at this moment.
Thank you. The next question, you may have gotten to this to a certain degree when you discussed your public safety platform, but the next question asks, the council has funded the creation of a mental health response service citywide as a first step in new approaches to public safety. What do you think are one or two subsequent concrete changes that should be considered for next steps to that?
Yeah, so I think right now, like I mentioned, I'm like really connected to the small business community on Lake Street. And it's not that they need police, they just need like response teams on Lake Street that are able to de-escalate situations. So I want to share a little story right now. I'm good friends with the owner of La Poblanita, which is on Lake Street. And someone came into his, what do you call it? They came into the small business and they locked themselves in their bathroom. And my friend didn't want to call the police because he doesn't trust the police, knows that the police isn't going to help the situation, but he had no alternatives. And he wishes, and he told me he wishes he had some sort of response team that would come in that isn't the police, that would help de-escalate the situation, but also make sure that if the person is having an overdose, they have people that can actually help that. So the number one thing that I would help change is making sure we do have response teams on Lake Street and anywhere else that our ward needs, so people don't have to call the police when they don't want to, right? Like they do it, and a lot of our small business owners do that because they feel that that's their only option. But the city needs to be really smart about making sure we have other methods of public safety that helps them. So that's one thing. And then another thing would be really important to make sure that it's not a policing thing, but right now the police criminalizes homelessness. And in my eyes, that's disgusting. It's unfortunate and it should not be happening. We need to make sure we repeal ordinances that criminalize homelessness. People that live in tents are not criminals. People that live in tents should not be bulldozed and kicked out of their own homes because that is their home, because our government isn't taking care of them. So I want to make sure that we decriminalize that and make sure that the Minneapolis Police Department has nothing to do with our unhoused community, because right now they're the first ones that show up and destroy their homes. So those are some things I would do.
Thank you. Next question that got sent in asks, who should be making decisions about what happens next for George Floyd Square, and how should those decisions be made?
Well, definitely not the mayor, and definitely not the city council. It should be the people on the ground, the people that are holding George Floyd Square down, and the people that are literally there every single day making sure that that space is a place where people are mourning still, that people are holding it down and keeping a space of saying that until we meet those 24 demands, it's going to be a people place. So I would say that the people on the ground should have the say. If that doesn't happen, obviously I want to make sure that the city council supports it. As a council member, I'm supporting what the people on the ground there are doing and making sure I abide by what they want and what they need, and always make sure that I have my ears on the ground to make sure that we're listening to the people doing the work at George Floyd Square.
Thank you. All right, next question we have submitted asks, of the various candidates who are running in the Ward 9 race, what makes you uniquely suited to win the city council seat, and what is your organizing strategy?
Yeah, so I have a unique experience. I was born and raised in Ward 9. Not a lot of people can say that in this race. I'm the only candidate that speaks the Spanish language. Spanish is a language of survival in Ward 9. And I'll repeat that again. Spanish is the language of survival in Ward 9. People use that to work, people use that to travel around Ward 9, and people use that to live. They don't often know another language besides Spanish, and they need someone that's actually going to be able to speak with them. I also have the experience of doing the work alongside the community, but also have the experience of wanting to fight for the things that I've experienced, because that's the experience of Ward 9. Ward 9 faces a ton of deportations. I've experienced that through my family. My family has experienced that. Right now, we have a big problem where our government isn't listening to our unhoused community, isn't doing work to make sure that our unhoused community has what they need to finally have a place to live. I've been homeless. I know what that feels like, and I'm going to fight every freaking day to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else. And I'm also working every single day to pass these policies at the Capitol to make sure that our communities are being looked after. I know I'm the only person that can attest to all these things at once, and I'm going to make sure that we do right by our people, by our community members, once we get to City Hall.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to turn back to a couple of the Q questions that had been submitted prior to the event. If the audience here has any others they would like to have asked, please, again, use the Q&A function, submit them, and we will get to them. Next question on the list is, what are your thoughts on the future of the Blue Line extension?
So one thing I want to make sure is that what often happens when we start putting things into our communities is that we aren't listening to people on the ground. So the first thing I would do is make sure we're listening to people that are most impacted by policy. I know oftentimes when we extend and do things without listening to communities, we're often displacing people, and we often can hurt and cause more pollution into our communities. So the first thing I would do is making sure I'm continuing to hear from people on the ground. For example, if y'all know right now, there's people trying to come into our ward and not allow for the East Phillips indoor urban farm to happen, and they haven't been listening to community. So I want to make sure that whatever we do, we're just listening to what community on the ground, the people most impacted by this decision, are actually being heard, and I'll make sure that that's how I decide what I do.
Thank you. All right. All right. We've had one question come up for the from the audience. The question is, I really appreciate you mentioning the housing first principle and your desire to raise money to build public housing. While we fight for these things, how do you view private housing developments? Is mixed affordable market building on an empty lot gentrification? What about an all market rate building on an empty lot? I assume it's asking your opinions on these various forms of development in the meantime for public housing.
Yeah, can you ask? I didn't hear that again. Sorry.
Sure thing. While we fight to win housing first and to increase public housing. How do you view private housing developments? Is mixed affordable / market building gentrification? And what would you feel of an all market rate building on an empty lot?
Okay. So first and foremost, I want to make sure that what we're doing is supporting public housing. Right now, there's a lot of people working to privatize it and not doing enough of helping expand public housing. So I want to make sure that now we're not doing like non-for-profit housing and making sure that we expand actual housing options right now to our community members. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question, but right now it's, how do I say it? Minneapolis just needs to make sure that what they're doing is actually getting people housed and it being tied to their income, not an AMI that isn't working for our community members. Yeah, so.
Thank you. The next audience question says that if you don't or do not, I'm assuming, want to answer it, that's fine. The question is, considering the candidates in the race with the ranked choice vote dynamic, would you say there's any one candidate who's closest to you in terms of values and who would do the most amount of good if they were elected?
I mean, I decided to run because I know we were missing something and my community asked me to run because we were missing something. I do think there's people in the race that align with some of my values and I would be happy to support them if I weren't to win the election. People like Rita and Carmen have done a lot of good work in communities. So I would say, while we don't agree on every single policy point, there's things that we can work alongside each other to make sure our communities are being looked after.
Thank you. Next question that we had submitted ahead of time asks for your views on your thoughts on the Upper Harbor Terminal project and what the future of that should be.
Yeah, similar thing, like I mentioned earlier, I don't support it. I don't think the city has done a good enough job to listen to people on the ground. And I feel for the north side because what's happening over there is happening here in Ward 9 with the East Phillips Indoor Urban Farm, where the city continues to ignore the people on the ground that are most impacted by that. So again, making sure that we're actually listening to people that are going to be impacted by that. It should be a starter, but it isn't even happening. But I hopefully answered your question with I don't support it at the beginning.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Next question that we had submitted beforehand, and I'd probably say last call to our audience members to get any questions that they want Jason to address at this point. I believe we're at the 10-minute mark of the end of the event. The next question that we have is, and you may have touched on this when we discussed your policy goals, but it is specifically, how will you support citywide rent control as a city council member?
Yeah, so I support it every day. I'm on the phones. I talk to people that don't know about it on my campaign while I'm speaking to people to support rent control. But as a city council member, I'll make sure to listen and follow the lead of the United for Rent Control people. Like I said, it's a community-led and community-centered campaign. I'm not the one that decides what to do. I'm the one that's working alongside the community, fighting alongside the community to decide how we move forward. So it'll be up to the people on the ground doing the work.
Thank you. Next question that we had come in from the audience asks, when looking at protected bike or transit lanes, versus on-street parking for small businesses. Who wins? I'm assuming it's asking which is better for the small businesses or
Oh, you're asking.
preferable.
Okay. So I guess you're asking like what I support or what people are saying, because right now I do know that Lake Street needs more access to transit in terms of like bike lanes or safety with bike lanes. To be honest, I don't really know how to answer that right now because I'll be honest, but I want to make sure that Lake Street does have accessible transportation, whether it's through bus systems or protected bike lanes, and also make sure that we're working alongside our small business community to make sure we're not hurting them as well, because they're also working class people that need help. So whoever asked that, I'd love to connect with you after. And if there's something I don't know, because it's something, as you're running for office, you don't know everything. You're listening to people that are doing the work. I'd love to learn more about that and would love to sit down with you and pick your brain to see like what we can do to make sure, I guess, to hear more about what your question actually meant and what you were trying to get at, because I'd love to learn more. So.
Thank you. On that, hope that you got the answer you wanted, and if not, I'm sure Jason would be happy if you would follow up. Awesome. Okay. So that about covers the questions that we had prior to this. And as we don't have, or as we have gone through the ones that have been submitted, I think at this point, if it would be all right with you, if you would want to maybe say closing or parting statement, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you all holding space for me, to speak with all of you today. There isn't much to say, but I just appreciate that space and also appreciate all the work that you all do. I always see y'all at picket lines supporting our union siblings and also making sure that we're protecting workers. So, yeah, I just look forward to working with y'all at City Hall, regardless of what happens today. So.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to join us as well, answer some of our questions. We'll be posting a recording of this, so it's available for members to review and share with comrades who weren't able to attend. We also encourage everyone to go and discuss further in the electoral Slack. I would also like to remind everyone that we have additional candidate Q&As scheduled over the next week, so I would encourage people to also tune into those or submit questions. Thank you all for joining us, and hope you all have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.